Dear students, in this session, I would talk about the loss of Normandy and the social and linguistic conditions after 1200. I hope and expect that after completing this session, you will be able to understand the conditions that were changing after 1200 and how did they impact both the political and social lives as well as the language of the times. Well, I hope you know, and I assume that you understand that the Norman conquest that took place in 1066 had a very strong impact on England and the language of England. People started using French with a great frequency, especially the upper class. However, these conditions continued only till 1200. The change in conditions after 1200 led to the re-establishment of English language during the rest of the Middle English period, that is from 1200 to 1500. So what I'm talking about now is the later half of the Middle English period. So, as I said earlier, shortly after 1200, the conditions changed. What do I mean by this change in conditions? England lost an important part of its possessions abroad. What was the result? The nobility gradually relinquished their continental estates. Now all the French nobility living in England who had their properties, who had their lands, who had their possessions in France, they gradually relinquished their continental properties. What happened? There was a feeling of rivalry. The rivalry that developed between the two countries. And the result was that very soon an anti-foreign movement, and in England it started in the 100 Years' War. 100 Years' War is a very, very significant event of the times, and this did not happen suddenly. This was a result of all that enmity that developed over this time period. During the century and a half following the Norman conquest, French had not only been natural but more or less necessary. It was necessary for the upper class, whereas English had to face a kind of indifference. However, in the 13th and the 14th centuries, its maintenance became increasingly artificial. Why? Because now the Norman aristocracy and the French rulers in the island, they were gradually being replaced with the natives, with the English rulers. The result was that the use of French declined, and to help it survive, a lot of effort was required, and its use did not remain natural anymore. For a certain time, there were various factors that helped to hold its ground, but French could not hold grounds for a very long period. Meanwhile, the social and economic conditions also changed, and these changes in the social and economic conditions of the land also affected the language, that is English language. Especially in the 14th century, English won its way back. So, if we divide the whole history of Middle English period into two parts, the first half was the period of Norman conquest and Normandy. The second half was the period of loss of Normandy. In the first half, French language was popular. It was the language of the upper class. In the second half, English emerged. It got importance. It got its significance. Anyways, talking about the loss of Normandy, the first link in the chain that led towards that was, broken in 1204 when King John lost Normandy. John actually had married Isabella of Angoulême in 1200. He loved her, and of course, he had some political motives as well, political aspirations for which this marriage took place. However, what he overlooked was that at that time, she was the she was formally betrothed to Hugh of Lusignan, the head of a very, very powerful family from the Normandy. Now, since John anticipated that there would be, some reaction against this marriage, so he himself decided to attack. When he decided that, it was appealed against, and the appeal was sent to the King of France. The King of France, Philip, saw an opportunity and summoned John, the person I've talked about who married this woman, to appear before the court in Paris. Now, what happened? John said that as King of England, he was not subject to the jurisdiction of French court, so he would not appear in front of the French court. He thought it was beneath his status. Now, of course, this became a point of contention, and rivalry started from this point. Anyways, on the day of the trial that was supposed to happen, the English king, he did not appear in the court of the French king. The results, of course, were severe. Philip proceeded at once to carry out this decision of the court and took it as an opportunity and invaded Normandy. Soon John's supporters deserted him, and finally Normandy was lost to the English crown. In fact, loss of Normandy, whatsoever other impacts it had, its impact on English language was very positive. It was advantageous for English language because from this point onwards, English language emerged very speedily and got significance. This was for the first time in the history that England in itself became the first concern or of primary concern. Well, there were still large continental possessions that were retained, but they were of very less significance as compared to Normandy. So now the political and social situation as well as the linguistic situation started changing. And with the loss of Normandy, the rise of English language started. So we would notice that in the second half of the Middle English period, this was the time when English language was refined, it was brought into use, and it got its significance because, again, it was related to the people, the masses, who during these times got an important place and an important position in the social stratum.